Welcome. I'm Kevin Miller, and I have conversations with people that help us make better meaning of our lives. In this episode, managing your relationship as a human who engages daily with the seven deadly sins. When I first laid eyes on a book with the title Self-Help from the Middle Ages, What the Seven Deadly Sins Can Teach Us About Living, I immediately interested myself. Even more when I found out that the author is an expert in medieval times. So Peter Jones, he's a writer and academic. He specializes in what he calls the history of the human heart. Over his career, he's taught at New York University. I think that's where he is now. The University of Toronto, University College London, Complutense University of Madrid, and the School of Advanced Studies in, I think it's Tyumen, Siberia, which that's where the book takes place. Or I think he was when he began the book, was there. And he helped really put history at the center of the liberal arts curriculum in that school. Just so interesting on his own trajectory, I felt like. But this book is about something that started in the 1300s, when I've now learned that the ultimate level of high education at that time was theology, with a focus to, quote, create self-aware citizens. And the most prized roles of the academics and whatnot at that point had job descriptions that involved analyzing the triggers of temptation and desire, giving lectures on fear and doubt, and healing the anxieties of people in crisis, which sounds like just what we need now, I think. That's why I did the show. I just thoroughly enjoyed the conversation and benefited from it that I had with Pete just moments ago, actually, and learned how I can have better relationships with these seven deadly sins, which the originator of this concept way back then described as generic thoughts, or in essence, human impulses, which, if you want a refresher, include pride, often referred to as vanity. 2, envy. 3, anger. 4, sloth, which actually can include sadness. It did initially. 5, avarice or greed. 6, gluttony. And 7, lust. And I found out those are actually in sequential order from the worst or the most difficult to the least, although they still cite them as 7 deadly sins. And you're about to find out these are seen as aspects of being human, not necessarily like these are terrible, wrong things you should never touch. The point is not whether we engage with them, because we do. It's what our relationship is with each of them, or rather how our relationship is with each. So coming up next is my conversation with Peter Jones. And again, our engagement with the 7 deadly sins. Peter, getting the next book across my desk, and here comes one that says Self-Help from the Middle Ages, What the 7 Deadly Sins Can Teach Us About Living. Almost a no-brainer. So I've got to talk to whoever wrote that book. And then as I got into it, I mean, this has ties to my upbringing in religion and Christian religion, and my interest in humanity and our tendencies and the good and the bad. And man, I just immensely curious and so enjoyed digging into the book. So thanks for being with me today.
Oh, thank you, Kevin. It's an absolute pleasure.
Well, this, first off, and you told a lot of the story. I mean, this comes from medieval times, and I'm not a history buff at all. And so kind of looked into that 1300s. What do you feel like is your interest in that? I mean, what draws you to that? Because I'm thinking about it. Is it lost values? Is it a more baseness to life? Is it something that you can even define for yourself?
I've asked myself this question for years. I really, I think that we all have this thing sometimes in life, this thing that fascinates us. And we think we know why we're fascinated, but actually we get to a later part of our lives and we realize that wasn't the reason at all. It was this. And I think with the Middle Ages, I still ask myself this question: why did I become so interested in this period of history? And I realized, I think it was about 10 years ago, it's because I found it disgusting or terrifying. There was something about medieval life that from a young age just absolutely horrified me. I like my home comforts. I like my central heating, my air conditioning, all of those things. And I think the thought of living in a world which seemed so muddy, wet, cold, full of violence, disease, lack of hygiene, lack of entertainment. I think from a young age, I think the Middle Ages sort of terrified me more than any other period of history. So why study it? Well, I don't know. I think I think for me, the puzzle of how people could be happy in a time and a space that was like that just fascinated me.
Well, I'm thinking about my brother. My brother lived in Africa for a decade and in Rwanda and some pretty harsh areas. And he said at one time, I think it helps me just feel more than I would in another environment. So I'm thinking about that as you're talking about that, just the rawness as you're talking about is maybe a draw just to, again, this inner aspect of humanity, especially in relation to our general comfort. Fair?
Absolutely. No, I think, you know, look, infant mortality is high in the Middle Ages. Disease is pretty terrible. Obviously, there are no antibiotics. This is a time before modern surgery, you know, and all the comfort of that. The diet is different. There's no easy access to sugar. There's no, you know, I think the idea of a time and a place that was harder to live in is always fascinating. But, you know, the great beauty of the Middle Ages as well is that it's still kind of misunderstood, if you know what I mean. Like, and as I started to study it at university and then professionally, you know, doing a PhD and postgraduate study, that kind of thing, the more you get into it, the more you realize there's so much still to learn. It's not, there's more material out there in European archives to tell us about what medieval life was like than anyone could read in a lifetime. It's this undiscovered country of unedited material, a lot of it. There's so much out there in our libraries, but there's still even more unedited in manuscript libraries. So I think the mystery of the Middle Ages is kind of what drew me onto it, you know, as well.
Well, something that I was completely ignorant about and incredibly interest myself in is how you reveal, I guess, that the Middle Ages at this time was this, it seems like this primary focus on self-awareness. That's not, I just didn't know. But as you uncover that and go through the story and the timeline of where we got these seven deadly sins, that back then, even you're referencing that, I'm paraphrasing what I understand, that the height of academia and of psychology and whatnot was self-awareness, was understanding humanity and psychology. And this is maybe the dawning. Is that relevant?
Yeah, I think so. Look, this is the thing, right? If you got an education in the 1100s to 1200s, and by the way, this is the era of the first universities. The first universities in Europe are founded in like the early 1100s. If you got an education at one of these universities, what are you going to do? What's the ultimate goal for a graduate? It's not to get a career in finance. It's not to get a career in law necessarily. The top job is to work in the church, to become a bishop, a priest, an abbot. And in these jobs, what are you doing? You're writing sermons, you're writing treatises, you're engaging in sort of theological disputations about what? About the mind, the human mind. The top brains of the Middle Ages go on for the top career to study basically how temptation, how desire operates, and then write sermons about it. You know, to be a theologian in the Middle Ages was to engage in questions of the brain. So I think that in a way, it's fair to call the Middle Ages the golden age of self-help because so many brilliant minds are engaged in trying to understand the mind in that period.
Okay, for context, actually, I'm gonna read something right out of your book. And you said it just there, but I love the detail of it. You said the best of these graduates competed to become bishops or cardinals, where the job description involved analyzing the triggers of temptation and desire, giving lectures on fear and doubt, and healing the anxieties of people in crisis. And then you went on to say high education was theology, or I'm paraphrasing, theology, and to create self-aware citizens. So this is 1300. And for people that are listening, especially my fellow Americans over here, and I had to go back and go, wait, when was America founded? In the 1700s. This is way before then. And here we are, 2026. And Peter, my primary focus is looking at this, self-aware citizens, and that it's hard to, as technology has increased, psychologically, we're kind of doing worse than ever since we started reporting it. And I would love to think we're at a dawn of coming back to creating self-aware citizens as even remotely as important as technology and whatnot. If you look at expenditures on humanity, looking at mental health it's way down the line. So again, there's why you're sitting here. I'm enamored with your studies, feeling like to some degree I'm biased for sure, but I feel like maybe they're not never been more relevant than right now.
Yeah, I mean, there's an overlap, right? Okay, so in the terms of therapy, um, in around about it's 1215, there's this mandate which is made by the Catholic Church, which is that every citizen in Christendom, which is effectively Europe at this time, has
Yeah,
to make confession once a year.
it's
Um, and
amazing.
and this confession, right? So it's now church law. Everyone must do it. This confession, what does it look like? It's not this sort of breezy thing where you just rattle off some shopping list. Instead, it's a conversation with a priest where you reflect on yourself, what you've done in the last year, where you've gone wrong. And this thing is often organized around the seven deadly sins, this confession session. So you'll move through your pride, your envy, your anger, your sloth, your gluttony, your avarice, and your lust. These seven categories of behavior. And you reflect on, and this is where it gets very modern, I think. So for pride, for example, the deadliest of the seven deadly sins, this is really a way to talk about ego and ambition and hubris and selfishness,
Yeah.
self-absorption. So in this confession session, you'll be talking about it. How has your ego been? What have you been, what were the times when you were selfish and what did that look like? How could you improve that? Um, so the whole system of confession, using the seven deadly sins, was a tool of self-awareness, making you more self-aware. How do I behave with other people? What are my sort of trigger points? When do I push over into a point of an obsession that kind of
Yeah.
shuts other people out? These are the kinds of questions that a good priest is asking people. And it's incredible because it does seem a lot like a kind of modern therapy session. Yeah.
Peter, it didn't even dawn on me. The show that dropped this week, and I think we're publishing yours next week really quickly for some reason. If I'm correct, the show prior was on addictions, but the focus was really compulsions,
Mm.
because I was looking at things from, I think many people like myself don't feel like I'm at least not clinically falling to an addiction, but do I have compulsions? As we define them, I would say absolutely yes. Do I have some that are bordering on, do I control them or do they control me? Okay. So here we're talking about that. And that's really, I hadn't thought about it to this moment, how I was interpreting your look at these seven deadly sins, that the sin happens when
Yeah.
you tip over. And you even say this in the book. Oh, there was a line. I don't know if I put it in my notes or not, but something to the effect of, does it own you or or do you own it? And the sin is when it owns you. Fair?
Absolutely. Yeah. That's really well put. I mean, so this idea of the seven deadly sins, we have it now, right? And we think about them, perhaps we think of them as quite a forbidding, very religious, very kind of old fashioned model of seven things not to do. Lust. Okay. Right. You should have no lust. Gluttony. Right. You should completely master your food obsessions. That's not how they worked in the Middle Ages. How they worked, and I think we have to go back to the origins of the system to understand this.
Okay.
This system was first invented by a monk called Evagrius Ponticus, who lived in the desert just outside Alexandria in Egypt. He was actually a politician. There was a sex scandal and he kind of lost his career. He couldn't go back to Constantinople, where he'd been a successful politician. He had to find himself again. He questioned himself, what's the point of my life? I've spent all this time being ambitious, trying to build a career in politics, and now it's over. What do I do? Reputation in shreds. So he goes to the desert where a lot of other people are going. They're sort of tuning out of life. We call them monks now, but that's not how that word has a modern baggage, doesn't it? We've got all these associations of people in sort of harsh linen.
Can I interrupt
Yeah.
and ask, because I hadn't thought about it from a spiritual standpoint, as I have a lot of studies there, I'm going to say
Yep.
he went to this because I enthralled myself. I read through all that you wrote on it and went to this place that to me looked like an ascetic commune. Fair? Okay, keep going. Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah. So Avarice, like lots of other people, is going, he's going to this part of the desert where they've set up these cells. They're sort of spaced out across the desert, across the sand, in a kind of community, but not quite, right? You're close to other monks, but you're not close enough to sort of see their facial expressions. You can wave, but not really see if someone's smiling or not. So you're kind of spaced out. They're spaced out. You're supposed to be living a life of solitude and reflection. And I suppose we would call it meditation now, coming to terms with your own mind, tuning out from the distractions of the world and trying to find a purer, kind of more tranquil existence. Evagrius is one of these monks. He's quite literary. He's quite ambitious. He decides he's going to make a book about his experiences. He makes several books. They're wonderful religious texts. But in one of them, he decides he's going to document all of his negative, difficult thoughts, tempting thoughts. And he compiles them into a book. And there's some some of them are really petty, small thoughts. I miss the cup I used to hold in my hands, back home. Some of them we can really understand. I miss my family's olive grove. He grew up in an olive grove just on the Black Sea. So, all kinds of tempting, difficult for him thoughts. He documents them all. And at the end, he takes a step back and says, these thoughts, they all actually belong in a series of categories. He actually has 8 originally. Yeah. He says there are 8 categories of thought. And he calls these the 8 generic thoughts. And they sound familiar, right? They're lust, gluttony, pride, vainglory, and so on. These 8, and the key word there is generic. He does not call them deadly sins. So he's saying that these are the things that come to us all, no matter who we are, no matter how pure we are. And he'd been in the desert at this point for a long time, tuning out the world, but he's still feeling lust. He's still feeling gluttony. He's still feeling, kind of an egotistical sort of thing. So the idea for Evagrius was that this was more of a map, really, of how the mind works. That these are the impulses that drive us all, whether we like it or not. That's a map of the brain. Now, when do they become deadly sins? For Evagrius, all of these are deadly when you push them too far. And later writers expand on this. John Cassian, who comes after Evagrius in the desert, he's the first to label them deadly sins. And he keeps the number 8, but calls them deadly sins. And he says, right, these are the demons that we must fight. But he still sort of recognizes that they come to us all no matter who we are. Even a baby at the breast, according to John Cassian, has gluttony, right? Desire for slightly more milk. So, and I think the point that I take from that, and I think this is the point of the 7 deadly sins as they were understood in the Middle Ages, is it's not a shopping list of terrible things that you only do if you're a terrible person. And they're not things that we need to get rid of to live a good life. They're the things we need to live with. They're the things that make us human. To be human is to feel gluttony. To be human is to feel lust. To be human is to struggle with ego. And that's what I love about this system. It's not really a system about getting rid of all of these things. It's a system about learning to live with these things and to push them in a slightly better, more sociable direction.
Well, I was going to ask that for you personally, and as you have studied these, well, I'm sure you saw all spectrums, but okay, coming up to here we are in this day and age, I'm looking and going, because again, I come to these from not a religious, I hope not a religious standpoint at this day, but a spiritual. And these are things that I don't want them to control me. But speaking of ascetic, I tempt, that's an interesting word to put on to what I'm about to say. I consider abstaining, living an ascetic life. And yet I also don't want to. I kind of feel like, where's the joy in life? I want to cook dinner tonight. I want to have wine with my dinner. I want to have music. And as you go along all these things, if I look at them as pleasures, in essence, I really enjoy participating with each one, but I don't want it to become an addiction. I don't want it to control me. I don't want my well-being, in a sense, to be dependent upon giving over to them. Yeah. So there's my own preface and kind of a question I'm just going to offer to you on the aspect of participating, I guess absence, participating, and then being overcome, like addiction is what we would say.
Yeah, no, it's a really good point. And I think we need to take a case study to sort of
Okay.
get to the bottom of this, right? So we could take anger, right? What would it look like to have zero anger in your life?
Rage.
Okay.
Oh, just have zero anger. Oh,
yeah, zero anger. Okay.
Like Zen master, the boot,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So somebody pushes in front of you in the queue for, the bathroom at a festival, and then 10 more people pile in, and you've got, 3 children with you, and they're all desperate for the toilet. Okay. I don't know. It's not a great image I'm building, but, imagine you feel nothing in this. It's absolutely fine. It's fine. More people push in front of you. It's fine. I'm Zen. There comes a point where no anger whatsoever is a bit absurd. Shouldn't you be sticking up for those 3 children who, have, a terrible need, and they're your responsibility. At some point, the injustice becomes too much. Okay, so toilet queue at a festival, it's fine. What about justice? What about, if you were, a lawyer, trying criminals who really needed to be brought to justice? Don't you think just a tiny spark of anger is going to get you up in the morning and make sure that case gets prosecuted the right way? We could extend it right out through our lives. There are moments, right, where anger is necessary because it does something for us. It gets something done. It gives a fire in our belly to, make things work, make the world right in some way. But obviously there's a point where this goes too far, where, as you put it, like the anger starts to control you rather than you control the anger. Now, medieval writers wrote about this really beautifully, I think. On the one hand, St. Augustine, he's, obviously great father of the church, but he's a great writer of the mind as well. This is the African bishop who writes the Confessions, which we think of as the first great autobiography, really, in Western history. Augustine says that, anger becomes a deadly sin precisely at that point when you start to enjoy it for what it is rather than for the thing you're trying to achieve, which I think is a nice way to put it, right? So when I'm angry in that queue for the bathroom at a festival and my children are desperate, to go, and all these people are jumping in front, I'm trying to get something done, and my anger is helping that. Please, guys, look, I've got children here. I'm really sorry. You can't just keep pushing in front. Fine. Nice little outburst of anger. I'm getting something done. But when I say, actually, that felt really great, and now I'm going to start policing all the other toilet queues, and sort of, because I just felt great getting angry at those people who pushed in, I have to start questioning myself. Am I just looking for another buzz? Again, my toilet queue is a terrible example, but think about being online. Think about being on social media. Think about making comments below the line of a New York Times article or something like that. Am I just waking up every morning and looking for another mole to whack, another little buzz, from being angry at someone? And, I think that's the thing. I think that's where I found a medieval insight quite useful. Another guy, a theologian called John Eiton, who was writing in the 14th century, describes anger as an addiction to being right. He says that you get to a point where you experience something called what he calls rixa in the Latin, which kind of means quarrelsomeness, but really it's sort of a readiness to be angry. And this is like a phase where your anger has taken you to a point of addiction. You're addicted to being right. You're addicted to the buzz you get from just, putting the world to rights. And that's the thing. What starts out as something healthy, which is part of your daily, repertoire of behavior, which I think all of the 7 deadly sins are, a little bit of gluttony, a little bit of ego, part of ordinary daily life, becomes something destructive when it becomes, when it starts to become an addiction in itself. You enjoy the thing in itself, the buzz you get from it, rather than the thing that you're doing that's positive in the world.
Okay, you just took me down. I am listening to you down a path that I think I want to continue. Can we look at them? I just like that concept of not abstinence, not abhorring them, not judging them. Which, I mean, I come from a Christian concept of sin in and of itself was bad. But if we look at these things and say, is there a relevant, or can they be a relevant tool in essence, but not an idol? Is that fair?
Yeah. I mean, I think the point is that all 7 of these sins are on a spectrum where having 0 of them is also a bad thing. In terms of, 0 gluttony, what will your life look like? You'll have no appetite. You'll have no desire. You may not feed yourself. You may not feed people around you. 0 lust, and this species is not is not going anywhere, right? Um, to what extent are they tools? I think this is the key, to live
And that
without them.
that's what I'm asking. It
Yeah,
may not be a good reference. I'm trying to think of it kind of like, well, here, I'll give another analogy, and I'm asking for your
yeah, okay,
perspective of the kind of the from a religious concept that we would. I can't remember the quote specifically, Peter, but it was something like, if I'm pointing to the heavens, trying
yeah,
to draw your attention to it, the propensity to look at my finger and start worshiping my finger. And if I'm just, the finger's just the way to point. The religion, the whatever is a way to point. I like that analogy. Is that, does that better align than the tool, or is there another analogy that helps us look at these as not all bad?
yeah. I think, let's see. I like to think of it this way: that the seven deadly sins were a process of self-examination, and not, it's definitely not purification, but improvement, right, of your life. So it's
Okay.
supposed to work on a cycle where you recognize, let's start with ego, pride. Pride is really, five little words. I don't need other people. That's the essence of pride as it was understood in the Middle Ages. It's a
Huh.
kind of, it's not just selfishness, like me, me, me. It's also, it's sort of shutting other people out. That's the essence of pride. I don't need your advice. I don't need your help. I'm not interested in the things you know about the world because I think I know everything already. That's the essence of pride. So recognizing that is, you begin, according to the sort of the self-help guide of the medieval sins,
Yeah.
you begin by recognizing, okay, sometimes I do have that behavior, right? Sometimes I ask my friend for advice. They tell me one thing, should I wear the brown shoes or the blue shoes? My friend says, wear the brown ones. And I say, I think I'll go with the blue ones. I recognize that I do that sometimes. I don't listen, even though my friend actually worked in the shoe shop for 10 years and has brilliant fashion sense and I know nothing. You start with that recognition. Maybe I don't listen to other people as much as I could. Maybe I kind of always go with my own instincts and don't always recognize when someone else has got something valuable to offer. So that's the first stage. The second stage is, right, okay, well, I can improve on that behavior. Right, next time, I'm driving my car in an area that my friend knows better than me, and he advises me to take a left here. I won't just say, well, I think I know it's all right. I'll listen a little bit better. But the point is then the next stage in this cycle of medieval self-help is repeat. You're never going to get it perfect. You're going to carry on doing that thing. You're going to carry on. There are always going to be moments where you think you know better. You're never going to get to a stage where you just always defer to other people. And you know what? If you did do that, it's also a bad thing. You become what Thomas Aquinas, 13th century theologian, described as pusillanimous, which means weak-spirited. So if you got rid of your pride altogether, you have no ego whatsoever, you're in this stage where you don't really understand what you can do. Like someone asks for help. Oh, I'm the wrong person. Sorry. I'd be useless anyway. That's pusillanimity. That's never believing in yourself, never understanding what you can do, where you are useful. So you have to just, in other words, say, you've got some ego. You're not listening to other people. You recognize it in yourself. You try to improve that behavior next time. Inevitably you fail. And then you repeat the cycle. So it's recognize, improve, repeat. And I think, so whether we call it a tool or not, it's a cycle, a process of self-recognition, which has at its core this fundamental truth, which is you're never going to be perfect. You're never going to, completely rid yourself of these habits, which are a little bit irritating and difficult to other people. Stop shooting for that. Instead, shoot for an improvement. And I think that's what I find so forgiving about this system.
No, I help myself with that perspective, thinking about my best friend's a doctor, and he talks about diabetes, and that we talk about someone has it or not. And from a type 2 diabetes, he says this is his perspective, and some others, others in that profession, we're all on the spectrum. We all have some level, when it tips over into clinical, they've got some measurements, but to some degree, we're all on it. And under pride and ego, which that's also where vanity falls, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Is right there.
Absolutely.
You do mention narcissism in there. And of course, it seems like it's never been a more common term that we use. And people seem to talk as if you have it or you don't, black or white. And I would say if it's it's a human propensity that we're probably all on the scale of and veer back and forth depending on where we are. And I hear you saying that. So if I recognize that I'm on the scale, we're all on the scale. Am I
Yeah.
going to, again, let it control me and be completely narcissistic? Or am I going to be aware of my narcissistic tendencies, which we probably all have to some human degree, and bow to them or not? Does that track?
No, that's really interesting. I mean, actually, it's great. It's a great thing to mention narcissism because, yeah, it does feel like such a modern category.
Yeah.
Obviously, we think of Narcissus, right, as the core of narcissism. And, what is Narcissus? The Greek myth, Narcissus looks into the pool of water, sees himself, falls in love with himself. What's interesting is in the Middle Ages, that's not how it works. The myth of Narcissus goes like this. Narcissus looks in the pool of water and sees what he thinks is somebody else and falls in love with that person. Why does that matter? The point is this: the medieval Narcissus does not recognize himself for what he is. He's unable to recognize himself. And that's the key. It's interesting you say it's on a spectrum. Pride, or superbia as it is in the Latin, is the sin, really. I said it's the sin of I don't need other people. Another way to put that is I don't recognize myself for what I am. When you say you don't need other people, you don't recognize your deficiencies. You don't recognize what you lack. I don't need anyone. I can do everything for myself. Well, that's because I don't recognize my limitations, my flaws. I don't see, look, what am I list them now? I'm a 40-year-old man. I sometimes, I can sometimes be quite grouchy. I'm very, very poor with my, I'm very inelegant. I'm very poor at a lot of tasks that involve memorizing things. The kind of recognition we need to live a kind of a well-adapted social life. But of course, it's on a spectrum because who recognizes themselves absolutely for what they are? Yeah. It's almost impossible. It's part of the human condition is to be unable to see yourself, isn't it? You think about the people in your friendship group, and we love them all to bits, but you recognize instantly these traits in other people. It's so easy to see them. But when it's you yourself, it's so difficult to see. Mm-hmm. It's a shock and an awakening when a friend will tell you, "Oh, this is what you're like. You always do this and this." How can I live in this body all these years and not recognize that about myself? Yeah. It's impossible to recognize ourselves with utter clarity. That's what life is a process of doing that, isn't it? So yes, we're all on the spectrum of narcissism in medieval terms because no one recognizes themselves completely. But I do think there are people who completely fail to recognize themselves. And according to medieval theory of pride, what does this look like? It's the person who becomes a fraud because you claim you can do all these things. There's a character called Simon Magus who turns up in first century Rome around the same time that St. Peter is in Rome preaching. And Simon Magus is struggling to keep up with St. Peter. So he's boasting about miracles even greater than what St. Peter can boast. So he says, yes, I can fly. Of course I can fly. And he gets this huge flying contraption. And the myth is that he then falls to his death. He thinks he can do it. He really can. Of course I can make this machine that will fly above Rome and it'll be fine. Not able to quite grasp that he doesn't quite have the technical skill to do it. This is the medieval narcissist pushing himself always to things he can't quite do, bluffing, blagging. It'll be okay. I'm sure it'll work. These are the phrases. Nothing terrible about this. We all do this to some extent all the time. And I think if there's one message I want this book to give, it's that, forgive yourself because my God, we commit all of these things all the time. But the key is in recognizing that and kind of trying to push it somewhere better.
That aspect there of we cannot recognize ourselves completely, I think is a big deal. And that's why we need other people to some degree. And gosh, I really appreciate your perspective. I help myself with that, that the myth of Narcissus on that. Also wanted to pull out, and I don't know that we'll get through everything, but how you the line or the piece in the book that you wrote about where I can't remember the guy, Silicon Valley guy, and he related some of the social media to each of these. And he said on Pride, Vanity, this was Instagram. I think most people can see that Instagram is a place where we show our best selves. We show the best side. We brag in essence. And that's what that is. So Pride, Instagram. The next one you have here or on the list is Envy, which is Facebook. And
As was,
and it,
yeah.
yeah, tell me that, because the description, craving for other people to fail or for their successes to be crushed. And I come in again from my Christian background. It was uh, a lot of focus just on wanting what other people have and not being content with your lot, with your, with what you have as well. Does that fit in there for you?
Yeah. Okay. So let's have a bit of a deep dive into envy because it's so fascinating. But first, Reid Hoffman is the guy in Silicon Valley who made this speech, and it was quite a while ago. But yeah, his point was that he said that no successful tech company, no tech company will be successful unless it exploits one of the seven deadly sins. So he said, look, this is a genuinely accurate map of the human mind and of the generic thoughts that come to us all the time. So he understood that really well. He said, like, you're not going to make money unless you're exploiting one of these seven. Now, to his credit, he did say later, the best thing is to then turn those seven urges to something good, so make an app that exploits your sloth, but then makes you active in the world, that exploits your ego, but then gives you a bit of humility as well. Okay. So he did say that, fair play to him. But I think it shows that the seven deadly sins are still really relevant. And arguably, I think you could think of any successful app and you can apply them to one or more. And I think actually you mentioned, Instagram, Facebook. I mean, come on, I think all seven a lot of the time are being pumped through these apps. Yeah. And not necessarily for terrible reasons. I think just piquing your lust, gluttony, ego is enough sometimes. Right. Envy. Okay. It's interesting. I sometimes survey people, which is your deadly sin? Which is the one you think speaks most to you? And the interesting thing is that envy is the one the fewest people want to admit to it, because it's kind of quite a terrible thing to admit to. Envy is not what we think it is today, according to medieval writers. So yeah, today, and if I envy you something in your life, let's say you've got you're going on a wonderful holiday, a vacation, somewhere hot, and I'm somewhere cold. If I envy you, I want to be in the hot place too. I want to have that holiday for that vacation for myself. Sorry, I'm Britishisms here. Holiday, vacation. That's not medieval envy. Medieval envy is, I want your vacation to be ruined. I want the rain to fall. I want everything to wash away. I want all of the ice machines not to work. I want the swimming pool to crack and drain. I want you to have a terrible time. If you've got a brand new car, modern envy, I want to have that car. Medieval envy, I want that car to explode, burst into flames, and you not to drive it. It's not wanting what other people have. It's wanting them not to have it. It's when your desire for something good curdles and you prefer someone else not to have that thing than for you to have that thing. So it's a really sort of unpleasant impulse, but we have to confront the fact that this is in the medieval guidebook of sins and this is a sort of forgiving system. So the idea is we all feel this to some extent. I'm hoping that most of us don't feel this in the full, volume, maxed out sense of like, yes, I definitely want none of my friends to get promotions.
Maybe I'm just softening it. Maybe the Christian concept just tried to soften it. It's not that I hope your car blows up, but I wish I at least had that car. No, but I hear you. I interest myself to think about it. Yeah.
I think like if we think that some of us have enemies, let's say political enemies, or let's say, sporting rivals, I don't know, but there's an element of that. If you ask somebody, would they rather their rival fail than the person they support succeed? Sometimes, you'd rather the other football team gets relegated than your football team wins. Sometimes some people believe that. So, sounds pretty unpleasant, but I think a lot of people have there's a flicker of this in a lot of our hearts sometimes. So this is the...
Yeah. Go ahead. Well, I think of jealousy. Jealousy and that concept of, oh my gosh, they don't deserve that great thing. And even from a religious standpoint, why do, good things happen to bad people sometimes and bad things to good people. And it feels unjust. I get that as you're talking.
Yeah, exactly. It's wanting your ex-partner's new relationship to fail. Unfortunately it's that. I mean, I think like maybe we're familiar with this with social media and it's when you see someone else's good news and you just, you're happy for them, but there's a part of you that wishes you hadn't seen that. it makes you unhappy to see that, and I think a lot of social media unhappiness stems from that. Instagram showing you other people's lives, how happy
Yeah.
they look, their family, it seems to be going perfectly. Their children are so well behaved, their home just looks so beautiful. Their vacations are wonderful. Their car is gleaming. And it's not necessarily that you want the car to burst into flames, but I wish I hadn't seen it, because somehow it makes me sad to see that other life that I can't have. It's interesting. The Latin word for envy is invidia, right? Invidia. It comes from videre, which means to see in Latin, and in, which is kind of against or not seeing, seeing against. I don't want to see. That's the original impulse behind this sin of envy. The painter Giotto, painting in around about the year 1300, he's famous. Some call him the first modern artist or the first Renaissance artist. If people Google the Arena Chapel and look at some of that, it's a great masterpiece. It's like the Sistine Chapel, but before the medieval version. On the walls of the Arena Chapel by Giotto, we see pure envy. We see people, there's this couple kissing. They're really delighted that they're going to have a child. They've been wanting to have a baby for years, and finally they've discovered this news. And there's this one woman who's put this sort of veil over her face, and she's turning away, and the blood seems to have drained from her face. She can't bear to watch someone else's happiness. That's envy. That's envy as I understand it as a 21st century person. Yeah. And there it is on a wall of an Italian chapel from the 1300s, and it's so recognizable. I think researching things like that was just, you get an electric shock of recognition. Past lives weren't so different from ours.
As I was reading your book, I thought of in the church, Christian church, a sermon decades ago, and they went through the 10 Commandments. And this guy went through them really in a granular level, and his effort, not that it's a true thing, but I interpreted, he kind of showcased this to a degree. We fail at these constantly. I violate the 10 Commandments constantly. If you get down to the core essence of it, it's humanity, and it's our struggle. And that's where I'm seeing that these things I benefit from and harm myself and others with every day, depending on where I had the ability to. Yeah, every day. Because envy, I mean, who can't relate to that? And I think, and this has been written about, that back a long time ago, I would only be comparing myself to a small area of people. And now I compare myself, if I go look at social media, to everyone. And there will never not be somebody doing more with less than me. They've achieved more. Yeah. They have less. They got less going for them. I have more going for me. And they outdid me. I mean, just there's no hope. There's no hope. Yeah. So if I don't come to peace with that, I'm doomed.
Absolutely. But how do we get out of this struggle cycle? I mean, that's the thing. I think this system of deadly sins, and we could look at envy as an example. The answer to it, as medieval theologians articulated it, seems to be, as we've already said, self-recognition. But the other point is a perspective about yourself and others. The question you must ask yourself, we're supposed to ask ourselves for all of these sins, is, when am I starting to be antisocial? When does this behavior, this thing, start to shut other people out? With pride, that's obvious. Like, I don't need other people. I'm shutting out your advice. With envy, I'm not really seeing your life for what it is. That's quite easy. When I see people online who I half know, because in a way they've been reduced down to a few lines of text and a few pictures on a screen. They're not as human to me anymore as they were. The more you see of people like that, and the less you see of those same people in real life, the more you kind of reduce those lives down to this distanced kind of existence. And it's easier to sort of not care about those lives as in the same way as when you actually see them face to face, right? And so we do I think we have a different relationship with other people online. We can it's more like the lizard part of our brain kind of takes over, if you know what I mean. But that's the point. It's sort of asking ourselves, when is this becoming antisocial? Gluttony is a good example, right? We haven't talked about that yet. Gluttony for medieval writers isn't just a question of eating too much or drinking too much. That is gluttony, but there are two other components. There are sort of three F's, as I put it in the book. Fattening is one of them, eating, drinking too much. But the other two are fixating and fuss. So this is written about by Pope Gregory the Great in the around about the year 600, but also Thomas Aquinas in the 1200s. And they say that fixating is when you make too much of a fuss or too much effort into thinking about a certain kind of food. Or I must have this kind of coffee. It must be Ethiopian, but I can't have Kenyan. No, it just, I prefer that. And you offer me Brazilian coffee. Pete, would you like a cup of coffee? And gluttony, this kind of gluttony is when I see the bag of Brazilian coffee in your hand and I say, oh, do you know what? Actually, I'm all right. No, I had one earlier. It's fine. No, I'm all right. Just because I don't want your coffee, right? I'm fussing, I'm fixating too much on the coffee I like. And it becomes antisocial. You can see how this will quickly become antisocial. I actually do want a coffee, and now I'm pretending I don't. And then I go out a bit later and get the coffee I do like. I'm a terrible person myself. I did this to my mother-in-law. My mother-in-law, in her 80s, I was coming to visit with my wife, and she knew I liked Ethiopian coffee, or she'd heard this. In fact, I'm terrible. I telephoned ahead to say, oh, could you get me a bag of this sort of special coffee? She went to all 4 supermarkets in the local town. As I say, she's in her 80s. This wasn't easy, looking for, and she ended up finding something called Kenyan Blend. And she bought it in the house and she left it kind of ceremoniously on the kitchen counter. I thought, oh, Pete, look what I got. Oh, thank you. Thank you. I took one taste of Kenyan Blend the next morning. And what did I do? I'm terrible. I went out and bought myself Ethiopian beans that I could grind freshly. And for the remainder of my time there, I made coffee with that instead. Silently, wordless. What a monster. And Kenyan Blend went quietly back in the cupboard. This is gluttony. And look, I know I'm a terrible person to be with sometimes. I just love, what is it? I love that fragrant taste. I love that kind of marginal 5% better coffee that I get when I grind the beans myself. I'm trying to improve on it. I know that it's not the right thing to do. It was definitely the wrong thing to do in that situation because it kind of did hurt her feelings. It kind of did make her think that she's got bad judgment now, that maybe she didn't quite grasp it, that maybe I'm a bit too aloof. This is when an ordinary kind of interest or obsession becomes a deadly sin, when it becomes a little bit antisocial, when you're pushing other people away rather than letting them close. I guess the right thing to do is to just say, oh yeah, whatever you've got in the cupboard's fine. Not to sort of impose yourself so much that this poor woman goes to 4 different supermarkets trying to please you. I've been a bit self-indulgent there, giving you my example, but I find this useful as a modern strategy to think about it as a self-awareness tool that also takes other people into account. When is my interest, my ego, my envy, my, gluttony, lust, whatever, when is that starting to put other people to just a little bit too much trouble? When does it start to shut other people out? When does it make myself kind of the keystone of everything? And that's, I think, the moment where, it can be a useful sort of self-awareness tool.
Yeah, I'm just in the same club you are, so I've got something to work on. I go visit my mom, and she keeps my kind of coffee and my kind of tea in the cupboard because I'm very, very picky with that. And you talked about the different areas of gluttony, and you had 5 in the book, and it was, I guess I'm going to put consuming before these: consuming hastily, sumptuously, I think is what we had. Too much, greedily, or daintily, like the fuss that you talked about. And I thought about that, being fussy and being finicky and having to have things just right. I did not associate those with gluttony. To me, gluttony was just the excess. You mentioned in your book, and that was one of the first things I thought about, was the old movie Seven with Brad Pitt and Morgan Freeman. Yeah, I think so. And that was, I think I remember the gluttony, and it was this gigantic guy that ate, 5 pounds of pasta or something like that. And that was how I think about it. But makes sense that that's why I appreciated your drilling down on where these really came from. and how when it gets in the way, when the desire comes before the relationship.
Yeah.
I like that measuring stick. Well, I don't know if I
Yeah.
like it, but I appreciate it.
That's right. For gluttony, Pope Gregory the Great said, the problem's not in the eating of the food, it's in the thinking about the food,
Yeah.
which is so, I mean, again, that sounds so modern. I feel like that could have been written this morning.
Yeah, that's what I'm
Yeah.
saying. The show I just did on addiction and compulsion, when it owns you and you don't it, which is how I've been looking at a lot of these things for years. My best friend, again, he's a doc, but he talked about we have a relationship with everything. So,
Yeah.
what is my relationship with coffee and tea and wine? My beverages. What's my relationship with food? What's my relationship with possessions? As we talk
Yeah.
about envy. And let's go on to what I was going to say. What's my relationship with sex? So lust is, we were looking at gluttony, and the one I had under that was lust, which I think we all know what we think, but tell us how you perceive it.
Yeah, so this is the least deadly of the seven deadly sins for medieval writers, which is kind of surprising. They ranked them. Pride was the deadliest, then envy, then anger, then sloth in the middle, then avarice, then gluttony, then lust. I mean, it's still a deadly sin. It's still one of those patterns of behavior that can drive us to a kind of obsession that can kind of eat us from the inside. Nevertheless, there it is. Their attitude to lust, sex in the Middle Ages is surprising. It's, I think we have a kind of Victorian idea of the Middle Ages, that they were all Puritans, that, sex had no place. Or sometimes we have the other view, that it was a total orgy. The reality is sex is in different places. You look in the margins of manuscripts, medieval holy books, and you'll find you'll find acts of cunnilingus, you'll find enormous phalluses with wings. Pilgrim badges, you go on a pilgrimage to a holy site like Canterbury or Santiago, Compostela, and you'll get a pilgrim badge with a huge penis on it. Why? Because for them, sex, it was a bit more fluid. You could connect like the mission to get to your goal, to achieve enlightenment, to get to wisdom, or to get to a holy place. You could connect that with sex. That wasn't a profane connection. And you can see the analogy, right? Lust itself, what is lust? I think it's covered by what we've said before. A certain being drawn to bodies was no problem. Other bodies, beautiful bodies, the bodies of other people, beautiful faces. There was no problem with that in a strict sense. No one's saying you should go around with no appetite for sex, no interest in other people's bodies. The point was, again, when does it become antisocial? And I think creeping people out is quite an obvious, antisocial point. But it's about using other people, right? It's when you're not thinking about their needs. It was defined really well by William Peraldus, who wrote this wonderful guide to the seven deadly sins in the 13th century. It was a bestseller, this book. William Peraldus says, lust is when you throw yourself into the present moment with no mind of the past or the future. And I found that absolutely fascinating. And I think, let's put that in relationship terms. When is it lust and when is it love? Lust is, I want this moment right now. And I'm not really, so you meet someone in a bar and it's fantastic, but they start to talk about their childhood. Fine. Not really that interested. They start to talk about their job interview next week. Yeah. Whatever. I'm interested in right now. This is lust. Yeah. Love, or something that's on its way to love, is that interest in duration, interest in the past, interest in the future of a person. It's not just about seizing them for where they are right now. I care about how they were last week, and I care about how they're going to be next week. That's when you're moving away from lust and moving towards something that's closer to love. I think they're so forgiving about lust, medieval writers, because they see it as the same spark that, lust is the same spark as will ultimately lead to love. There's this writer, Bernard of Clairvaux. Right, he's a monk from the 12th century. He's one of the great forgotten thinkers of European history. Who's heard of Bernard of Clairvaux? I mean, but in the 1130s and 40s, when he's alive, he's the most famous person in Europe, more or less. He's the most powerful person in Europe. He arbitrates when two kings fall out. He's the one who does the arbitration. His student becomes Pope. He's basically the boss of Europe. He writes so beautifully about love and about lust, actually. He felt it so keenly himself. He describes this moment in his childhood, well, not his childhood, sorry, his adolescence. He's by a lake. He's lonely. It's a picnic. He's bored. He sees this beautiful woman across the lake and he feels something extremely powerful. What is it? Attraction? He throws himself into the icy cold water because he can't bear it. We learn everything about what you're supposed to do with lust, according to Bernard, from this moment. It was a powerful feeling. He's not denying that. He couldn't bear it. He felt lust so keenly, but he felt he needed to redirect it away from kind of the passing body of another person and towards something more profound. For him, right, that was a lifetime of worshiping God and trying to find himself in a monastery. But I think the point was not to disgrace or shame that feeling that you felt. It was powerful. It was magical. Love is a magical and powerful thing. And medieval writers don't try to deny that. But their argument was that lust is too short term. Turn that into something with duration, a commitment towards another person, an interest that goes beyond this moment. And then you're on to sort of redeeming this. Obviously, that's easier said than done. And all the sort of unrequited lovers will say, yes, but I can't. I can't do that. Obviously, it takes two to turn that lust into love. But yeah, that's the theory anyway.
Well, and as you said, these all, to a decent degree, it could be like a Venn diagram. They all overlap. And in that center is a self-indulgent. Because as you were talking there, I'm thinking about, one of the next ones is avarice, which greed, right? Avarice, greed, that it's when it becomes, again, as you said before, it becomes about the thing, not what the thing means overall, not what it leads to. It becomes about the thing. I thought about the Lord of the Rings, the Ring of Power.
Oh, yeah.
It was my precious. It was that thing, and how we do that with possessions. And that's one that I've dealt with in recent times as I went through a divorce and losing the home and realizing the attachment I had on to these, brick and mortar and glass and these objects, a couch, a car that I'd kept for a decade that we don't use. Why did I keep that? It's the attachment that I had to it. Not saying it's all bad, but man, it sure brought me into questioning these aspects of really attachment. Is that fair to put along with avarice and greed? Is an attachment?
Yeah, exactly. So avarice, the sin of greed, was attachment, as you say, an obsession with objects. And the idea was, so this could be money, but any object like sofas, as you mentioned, like, just a fixation, or collecting, like obsessively collecting items. I think the thing is, like all the deadly sins, it's that moment where the obsession becomes antisocial. But it's also when, I think what I find refreshing though, reading about medieval avarice, is that they respected as well the power of objects to do something else, something good. Nobody was advocating, I mean, some did, but nobody was advocating total poverty. St. Francis and his followers did advocate that, but that was actually banned by the Pope banned the idea of total poverty in the early 1300s. The doctrine of total poverty, the idea that you should own no possessions whatsoever, was in fact banned by the church. They saw it as dangerous. This was a system that was more flexible than that. It understood that objects could lead you places. Abbot Suger, who wrote this beautiful treatise in the 1100s, talks about beautiful objects leading the mind to beautiful places. You look at something and it opens your mind, like a feat of great engineering, for example, opens the mind to the magic of what human beings can do when they work together. That in itself takes the mind to places that makes you think about other people, thinks about the world as a connected, complex, sociable place. This is a good thing, and medieval writers recognize that. Your story about that makes me think of the idea that objects have soul. And I think, the more medieval records I read, the more I see that they respect beautiful objects. You think about beautiful books. The books that are made in the Middle Ages are not functional items. They're not just like for giving you information. There's a respect for the object itself. They're beautiful, beautifully illustrated, gold leaf a lot of the time, wonderfully bound in leather and other things. The object, there's a lot of care. And I think the idea is that an object can express your soul. It can be an expression of your character, an expression of your life. Those objects that mean so much that you're confronted with losing and it's something like a divorce, is because they express who you are. They're part of the love that you've had in your life. The object represents and can lead the mind back to that love. And I think this is, if we're to take all of the 7 deadly sins as forgiving, and as human traits, whether we like them or not, and as things that can be turned towards the good, an attachment to objects can be a beautiful thing when it expresses our character, reminds the mind of the beautiful things that humans are capable of, the beautiful things that we have done, the beautiful people we have known. But of course, it becomes an obsession when the object, we care about the object in itself. I only care about collecting these things because I want the things, then, or the clothes or whatever. We start to become boring. The objects are more interesting than us. We pour too much of ourselves away in collecting and accumulating these objects. It's a difficult question to ask ourselves. When is this obsession blocking out other people?
I like that term, obsession. Is it an obsession? Even looking at, I had this one automobile, and to me, did it have a soul? I don't know, but it had memories. It had, I attached meaning. I bought it to take care of my family and, my wife and kids. And now it's sitting there rotting, literally going into disrepair, and it could serve someone else. And that was the question of, I didn't think of that term, but am I obsessed with holding on to this memory while it could serve somebody else? And I ultimately sold it, and I see it around town and try to think good thoughts. And yet that's the question is, I appreciate is it an obsession? Of course, we think about the person, who has an entire room just for their shoes, and think that's maybe might be an obsession, but just again, questioning our relationship. Well, the next one here, sloth. And you had that one, in the original 8, I think you had sadness, and that took the place of sloth. This is one, I expanded my understanding a lot through your book, Pete, of looking at it as a sadness, as you associated depression along this line as well, and that it was kind of becoming, you said, when the most mundane, or the opposite would be when the most, or let's see, what was a disengagement from the moment, and that pleasures were no longer pleasurable. There was a song lyric recently that I heard, and it was overrated pleasures and underrated treasures.
Oh yeah.
And anyway, so tell us about sloth, because I think before I just looked at it, it's lazy. It's the couch potato. So somebody who doesn't do anything, they're undisciplined, unmotivated. And obviously there's a lot more to it.
Yeah, sloth is the most enigmatic of the 7 deadly sins. And it doesn't mean anything like what we think it does. Sloth today, what does that mean? I don't want to get out of bed. I'm lazy. I don't want to do any work. There's an element of that. But the reality is they never translated this word into Latin even in the Middle Ages. Sloth is an English translation, and it's a bad one. In Latin, they just called it Arcadia, which isn't Latin at all. It's Greek, because they thought, well, we haven't got a word for this thing. In Greek, that Greek means something like lack of care or not caring.
Yeah.
Sloth is actually, Dante describes it, the Florentine poet from the early 1300s. Dante describes it as your heart stopping. You no longer love anything anymore. Sloth is somewhere between boredom, inertia, inability to move forward, despair, depression, but also restlessness. I think I'll apply for another job. Oh, maybe I'll move to another city. Maybe actually, no, I want to do this life. No, this job. All of these are sloth. They're all under that umbrella. I think often a lot of this sounds like depression. But I know that's controversial. But let's take this case study. Elizabeth of Schonau. She's a nun from the 12th century from the Rhineland. She loves being a nun. She loves her life of prayer and singing. One day she turns up to the service. She opens her mouth to sing, but no notes come out. She can't sing, no voice. Okay, she goes back to her room. She opens up a book, can't get through a page of reading. Suddenly she finds that she can't do anything anymore, that she doesn't want to do any of it. Everything seems pointless. And you know what's interesting about this is she used to love it so much, and now it's like the absence of that love tortures her. Why is it that the things I used to love now leave me feeling cold? Why is it that my favorite song is now just a drone in my ears? Why is it that my favorite food is tasteless to me now? Why is it that all my favorite destinations for vacation, I just don't care. I don't want to go to any of them. For me, look, I fell into a bit of a sloth moment in my life. I just didn't want to teach anymore. You know, I was teaching medieval history, the thing I'd loved since I was a little boy, and suddenly I don't want to teach. I don't want to listen to my own voice talking about the Middle Ages. I just want to curl up and sleep for 1,000 years. That's how I felt. And I think that's, you know, hopefully not too familiar for too many people, but familiar for quite a lot of people. Mm. This is sloth. And I think the best insight I found studying the 7 deadly sins in medieval writing is that there's no cure. And that is my favorite insight, that they accepted this, as a normal part of human existence. Sloth is one of the 7 deadly sins. So it's just as common as lust and gluttony and ego and everything else. These are the 7 things that we all feel, no matter how good we are, no matter how we live our lives, we're going to feel them at some point. So that gives me comfort. In the Middle Ages, this was recognized as just a normal part of the human hardware, sort of falling out of love with life, falling out of love with the things around us. So that I found quite empowering in a way. You know, it's not stigmatized. And the other thing I think is one writer, it's actually Bernard of Clairvaux, again, that guy who was the most powerful person in Europe, who wrote so beautifully about love, who threw himself in the cold lake. Bernard describes sloth as just a common part of running a race. He says that life is this long race through rough terrain. We can think of life as an ultra marathon in our terms. Yeah. And nobody does one of those without stumbling and falling now and then, right? It's impossible to run over long terrain, rough terrain, crags, rocks, whatever. You're not going to go the same speed for all of it. Anyone who's run one of these long mountain trails will know everyone stops and walks up the really steep hills. You can't just run a steady pace. We're not machines. And you stumble at times. That was Bernard's point. And he's describing specifically sloth when he says that, the slothful heart. Don't hate yourself, or don't question yourself too much for having fallen into a sort of treacle-like moment in your life where you don't love enough, where you don't care so much about the things you used to care about. This too will pass. This is just one of those moments where we stumble. We're not going the same speed. We'll get to a point where things come easier again. The love will come back. Have faith. William Paraudus, the writer of that bestseller about the 7 deadly sins in the 13th century, put it this way. He said that fields that grow with thorns and thistles often go on to have fruit all the more sweet because they had those thorns and thistles first, compared with the fields that never had any thorns or thistles at all. And we have to try and remember that. Easier said than done, but we have to try and remember that in those moments where we're feeling the sharp prick of a thistle, when we're feeling like there's no love left in our lives for the things that used to drive us.
Well, Pete, I take all of this and appreciate how you tended to the issue, how I perceive that you tended to the issue with kind of exposing our humanness, our humanity, but as you did just right there, also pointing to the benefit, if not the need, of having grace for ourselves as we deal with these issues that are part of our humanity. Yeah, again, I look at them and I help myself with your depiction of them, of going, these are things that are a part of me that I willfully make a part of my life to some degree, but what's my relationship with them? And gosh, I'm just I'll be tomorrow. I meet with a group of guys every Friday, and this is what we'll be talking about, Tim. I actually sent them a picture of the book cover, and then a couple of the pages inside where I had marked up some things, and eager to talk about our relationship with these aspects in our lives. So thank you. I look at the book and think, oh my gosh, the amount of work you put into it, I amaze myself with, and I'm grateful. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. It's been wonderful. And every time I talk through these issues, I discover something new about them and about myself, I think. And I've definitely done that in this conversation. But no, thank you so much. It's been great chatting.
Likewise. Thank you. Thanks for joining us in the discussion. That again is Peter Jones and the book Self-Help from the Middle Ages, What the 7 Deadly Sins Can Teach Us About Living. Till next time, here's to you and me making better meaning in our lives and experiencing the miracle of living.
Yeah.